To give a clear and simple illustration of the new keys only tools in the Curve Editor, we'll use a very simple animation, a bouncing ball. I've got 40 frames of animation here. Let's open up the Curve Editor, maximize that view, and we've got our sphere Z position. And our new tools are here, keys only tools, and we'll look at all of them. Starting from the left, we have Nudge. Nudge will work on one or more keys. We could make a selection, click that button, and the selected keys are moved one frame later. We can keep clicking that button. If we want to reverse the direction, move them earlier, hold down the Shift key, and click to nudge to the left or earlier. Next is Flatten to average value. This only affects multiple contiguous selected keys. In other words, if you have a discontiguous selection, like this one, it won't work. You need to select several keys in a contiguous region in time. With those keys selected, we can test out Flatten to average value, and you can see that all those selected keys moved to the average of their values. The tangents also got flattened for a perfectly straight flat line. I'll undo that with Control-Z. The shifted function of that icon is Weld. If you hold down Shift and click, you'll merge all of the selected keys to a single key at the average value and average time. I'll use Control-Z to undo that. Next, we come to Flatten. And it again only affects multiple contiguous selected keys. We could select several keys in a row. And when we click on Flatten, all of the selected keys get moved to the value of the leftmost key, or the selected key that occurs earliest in the timeline. And it's kind of like a destructive version of stepped tangents, or also known as a hold key. All right, undo that again with Control-Z. The shifted function for Flatten is to flatten to the last selected key. And since I dragged my selection rectangle from left to right, the last key that I selected is the one on the right. Hold down Shift and click Flatten, and all of those keys move to the last selected key. Undo again with Control-Z. Moving on, we have Ease to Next Key. And it simply moves the selected keys closer to the value of the following key. Click that a few times, and you'll notice that they start to move towards one another. I'll undo that with a bunch of Control-Z commands and restore my curve. The shifted function of Ease will move the selected keys closer to the value of the previous key instead of the following key. Hold down Shift and click on Ease, and what we get is a similar situation, but we're basing that upon the keyframes that came before rather than the ones that came after. Control-Z to undo that once again. Then we come to Split, select a keyframe or keyframes, and then click on Split, and you'll get two keyframes there instead of one. The original is deleted, and the two new keyframes are placed one frame before and one frame after the original deleted key, and that results in a flat curve that's 2 frames in duration right there. Undo that with Control-Z. Then we come to Space Keys Evenly. Let's make a larger selection here. I'll dolly back with the wheel and select more keys. And Space Keys Evenly will move the keys earlier or later in time to achieve an even timing between the first and the last selected keys. Here it is, Space Keys Evenly. And you'll see it's shifted them all. And now the timing between each keyframe is equal. We space them evenly between this key and this one. You notice that changing the timing has distorted the shape of the curve. I'll hit Control-Z once again to undo that. The shifted function for Space Keys Evenly will move the keys to different values to achieve even spacing between the first and last keys. Hold down Shift and click. And now the change in values between adjacent keys is equal. We can make that a little bit easier to see by making them linear tangents. And we get almost a straight line there. Not quite, but if we wanted a perfectly straight line, we could, of course, once again, use Space Keys Evenly without the shift. And now we have an almost straight line. It's never going to be perfect because we're quantizing to frames here. Okay, I'll undo all of that with Control Z and back to our original curve. We're moving on to relax. And that, once again, only affects 3 or more contiguous selected keys. When you click on relax, it adjusts the key values to move them towards a linear transition between the first and last selected keys. They're trying to go into a straight line. And again, we're only adjusting values here and not timing. I'll undo that with Control Z a bunch of times. Take us back to here in our history. The shifted function of relax is align. Hold down Shift and click, and it will force all of those keys into a linear transition between the first and last selected keys. Undo that. Then finally we come to loop. For the loop function, you have to select some key. It doesn't matter which one, but if no key is selected, then all of these toolbars will be grayed out. With any key selected, click on loop, and what it does is create a new keyframe at the end of the current timeline and assigns it to have the value of the first keyframe in the timeline. Watch closely when you do it. You might get tangents or keyframe values changing, and if that happens, then you might want to adjust it. But in my case, it seems like it came out right the first time. I'll undo with Control Z, and then finally we have the shifted function of loop. Hold down Shift and click, and all that does is adjust the last keyframe value to assume the value of the first keyframe. Undo that. Okay, those are all of the new tools on the Keys Only Tools toolbar.